Have you guys ever seen the meme where it's like, we didn't have autism back in my day, but Grandpa would spend hours building model trains, and Aunt Susan would name every country's flag, and your great uncle always just was awkward and quiet? To a lot of people, that might sound like a collection of stereotypes, and yes, you have a point. Which is why I think it's important to inspect the difference between representation and codedness in fictional characters and how we apply that to writing. But first, what is the difference between representation and coding? It's actually pretty simple. Characters that are a representation of something are very explicitly that thing. For instance, Cassandra is an Irish representation because she is explicitly from Ireland. We even hired Jess Hay, the voice actress for Cassandra, because she's a bilingual voice actress who is a native speaker of the Irish language and currently lives there. When we write our characters with proper representation, we try our hardest to consult with people who actually share that culture, and we've encouraged our performers in the past to show a little discernment and even correct us if we get something culturally inaccurate. Believe me, it's come up more than once. A character that is coded is only implied to be that thing. For example, Bree is autistic-coded, and her voice actress is not only one of the series' authors, but also on the spectrum herself. This means that the tropes or stereotypes that may come across as autistic are actually being informed by the experience of someone with a general knowledge to convey an experience without it needing to be explicit. Which one's inherently better? Well, in my opinion, neither one is better, and both have a definitive purpose. With representative characters, the benefit is that people who may feel their type of person is underrepresented in media might feel a bigger connection with a character that says out loud who they are and what it all means. Recently, there has been an egregious misinformation and disinformation around autism spectrum disorder being pushed by a right-wing narrative in the United States. And as such, people without a lot of exposure to what autism actually looks like might fall for the propaganda depicting them as lazy, deranged, infirmed, socially inept, and incapable of even taking care of themselves long term. Yes, it is true that some people with autism might experience a debilitating form of this condition that requires some form of long-term care into adulthood. It is also true that autism, being a spectrum, means that it can look like a lot of things. Recent CDC data shows that roughly 1 in 31 people in the United States have some form of autism. That's right, that's around 3.2% of the population, with an upward trend over the last couple decades. There's a lot of things this gets attributed to, most common of which seems to be the anti-science push that vaccines cause autism. But according to Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, this is largely based on the Wakefield study, a retracted study from 1998 that relied on coincidental timing of diagnoses and concerns regarding specific vaccine ingredients. It was highly criticized for presenting fraudulent data and even ethical violations. Despite this, it has planted a seed of doubt that remains even today, with certain political leaders claiming boldly that studies have not ruled out a link, which contradicts decades of actual science and health research across millions of children the world over. If you want more information on autism, there are a ton of other great creators that work extensively to break down the misconceptions and validity of autism spectrum disorder, such as I'm Autistic Now What, which is actually a big source for this video as well. Now, let's get into autistic representation in media. With something as broadly different as autism spectrum disorder can be, you might be thinking two things. One, how do you keep a character from just falling back onto overused tropes when actual autistic people can be so vastly different? And two, how can you even be sure a character is autistic-coded and you're not just using some form of anecdotal bias? To do that, let's look at some characters that are generally considered to be autistic-coded. Remember, this means that the character is not canonically confirmed to be on the autism spectrum, but rather, to the general audience, they feel like or seem as though they could be autistic. Or they may be a character that other autistic people claim to relate to specifically with regards to their experiences that differ from neurotypical individuals, people who don't have autism. Sheldon Cooper. Although Sheldon as an autistic character is fairly controversial given the characterization of nerd culture present throughout the Big Bang Theory, My personal beef with the show is how the characters are inconsistent between seasons, and the continuity is only loosely followed at best. No, seriously, sit down and binge the entire series, and by season 3 you'll be scratching your head. By season 5, the faults are glaring. Sheldon is often considered an autistic character because of his strict routines, lack of social nuance, and intense focus on physics. This plays to a few common tropes that typically get associated with autism, but why? Well, people on the autism spectrum may have trouble with sensory changes, including certain food textures or taste, fabric styles, and environmental aspects like sudden noises or raucous conversations. We see a few of these in instances with Sheldon, which was why he prefers to have a strict set of routines he can follow. By maximizing the control he has over his setting, he's less prone to sudden sensory changes that could lead to discomfort or distress. The lack of social nuance comes from another long-held belief that autistic people don't have emotions, but that's entirely not true. Autistic people experience a wide range of emotions, but they might process or convey them differently than one expects. Further, they might suppress emotions due to trauma or bullying. People with autism tend to take people very literally. For instance, if you were having a bad day and someone said, "You look like you're having a bad day," and you go, "No, I feel great," in a obviously sarcastic tone. An autistic person might interpret you literally and then get frustrated or confused when you still seem angry. They might even internalize it, thinking the problem is that they asked or said something in the first place. The thing is, this can be a learned behavior, and Sheldon, growing up in the Bible Belt, rural Texas, very likely has some form of religious trauma, as we not only see in The Big Bang Theory, but also in young Sheldon. Another character that often gets claimed by the autistic community is Jotaro Kujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I had to take the excuse to talk about JoJo, guys, I'm sorry. Jotaro is generally considered autistic because he struggles to express emotions, displays sensory issues, has a blunt communication style, and an intense focus. He has a special interest in marine biology, which is another trope people often use to code autistic characters, either intentionally by the author or unintentionally through fan interpretations. The reason for this is savant syndrome. Roughly 10% of people with autism also have savant syndrome, which is characterized by an extraordinary or specialized ability in memory, music, art, or calculation. This might even be completely counter to their overall cognitive ability, leading some people to refer to this as an island of genius. It should be noted, however, that many people who have savant syndrome are not autistic, but also every savant has some kind of neurodivergent trait, such as me with ADHD, but that's a topic for a different video. Futaba from Persona 5 is another character that often gets interpreted as autistic, not only by fans, but the English voice actress for Futaba, Erica Lindbeck, said in interviews she approached the role of Futaba under the interpretation that she exists on the autistic spectrum. It's difficult to say, though, with characters like Futaba due to the acute trauma she experienced as a child. And given that the game has a heavy emphasis on Japanese culture, it's more likely that Futaba is hikikomori. I've talked a bit about hikikomori before and how it relates to isekai anime and culture, but it's important to remember that just because someone is hikikomori doesn't mean they're autistic. However, a recent study at Kyushu University studied 416 clinical patients and observed that people with AQJ, the Japanese Autism Spectrum Quotient, were significantly more likely to exhibit hikikomori conditions due to the common complaints from those on the spectrum, including difficulty with social communication skills, leading to pathological social withdrawal and social isolation. It is definitely the case that Futaba has PTSD due to her experiences, and in fact, some people with PTSD might exhibit autistic traits. This is because currently the two conditions are comorbid. Because of society's mistreatment of autistic individuals living in a world that hasn't tried that hard to really understand them until recently, we don't live in a society that produces no untraumatized autistic people. This means that everyone with autism has likely experienced some kind of acute trauma related directly to their autism. And while Futaba's doesn't come necessarily from a general mistreatment of the world around her, the adults connected to her part of the story used her grief to induce a deeply traumatized state and even warp her memories. So, how can we use these characters to answer our two questions? It's important not to rely on tropes in order to imply or suggest that a character fits into a specific criteria when it's not canonically stated. However, it's also important to understand that what coding does is allows people to use a sort of metaphorical allegory to their personal experiences in order to communicate something they might otherwise have difficulty conveying. So when someone with autism says, "I think this character might be autistic," what they're most likely trying to say is, "I'm using this character to convey something about autism, potentially from a personal level, but also from a community level. The anecdote versus the community consensus." And we can see that in how commonly the character is accepted as a potential representation by fans. Which is where I'm going to jump into probably the most widely accepted autistic-coded character, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is widely beloved by the autistic community due to its fast-paced, predictable gameplay, vibrant sensory input, and relatable, unapologetically unique characters. The franchise acts as a comforting special interest, offering sensory stimulation, structure, and themes of accepting one's unique, non-conforming self. The games feature bright, contrasting colors and high-quality engaging music, which can be calming and enjoyable for those with sensory sensitivities. The gameplay is fast, but follows clear, predictable rules, allowing for mastery through repetition. The deep lore, numerous characters, and fast-paced gameplay, like collecting rings, performing perfect runs, offer an ideal, stimulating environment for intense focus. And characters like Sonic, who are independent and fast, and Shadow, who are socially distant, allow for identification with characters who do not follow social norms, offering a sense of comfort and validation. The games also offer a sense of control and safe exploration of the chaotic, brightly colored world, which can help with emotional regulation. The Sonic fan community and the found family aspect of the characters provide a welcoming space for autistic individuals to connect. Found family is almost crucial in ways within minority populations, and with each character offering unique strengths, specialized skills, and having a wide variety of easily recognizable and distinctive designs, the games and the characters fall into a niche that appeals greatly to neurodivergent people, including those on the autism spectrum. Not to mention, there may be some actual science behind why Sonic the Hedgehog is such a definitive autistic character, and that relates to proteins. Not the kind found in chili dogs, but the kind found in our bodies called hedgehog proteins. Just to clarify, this is only something I recently learned even existed, but from what I'm able to understand, hedgehog proteins are what our body uses for cellular specialization and have been crucial in how animals develop as a species. There are many types of hedgehog proteins, but one of them discovered in 1991 by Robert Riddle was literally named after the video game character. What's even more interesting is that there's a link between higher levels of Sonic Hedgehog protein and autism spectrum. A recent study analyzed the levels of Sonic Hedgehog protein in autistic individuals and found that despite the severity, the levels of SHH were always higher than those who were not on the autism spectrum. This could be significant because it relates to oxidative stress receptors. Oxidative stress can lead to tissue damage in the brain, causing, among other things, fatigue, inflammation, and cognitive decline. Autistic people produce a higher level of oxidative stress, and this could relate to also having higher levels of Sonic Hedgehog protein, which, given the link between the Sonic community and the autistic community, just felt like way too interesting of a detail not to include in this video. So how can we be sure that coding characters isn't based on an anecdotal bias? In truth, we don't need to. Death of the author is an often misquoted term that is used to try and separate a person's personal actions from their intellectual property. However, when Roland Barthes wrote Death of the Author, it was intended as a literary critiquing device. This means that the author, writer, artist, singer, developer, whatever, is not the sole authority on their own creation, but that it is also entirely left up to the fans and critics to interpret the work as they will. Even the title author comes from the same root word as authority. So in Death of the Author, Barthes is asking us to remove the authoritative stance on art by allowing it to flourish under our own understanding. To that regard, coding characters this way is about fan interpretations to begin with, and it means it's perfectly valid to have a headcanon or a favorite interpretation that you take as truth about a fictional character, even if it's only informed by an anecdotal opinion. After all, that's what fanfics are for. Still, it does bear to keep in mind that true autistic representation means that the character is confirmed by the canon to be autistic. This can be done explicitly, such as the character saying, "I am on the autism spectrum," or "I'm autistic," or it may be done via context clues through observing a broad range of autistic traits. However, it's important to remember to keep in mind that autism doesn't look just one way. So in order to have proper representation, it's important to understand what a stereotype looks like and how to vary these things accordingly. It gets dull when every single autistic character checks boxes like savantism, outbursts, lack of social awareness, and so on. And while this is true that these things might be common among autism spectrum, subverting these expectations can lead to more diverse and realistic cast of characters. Autistic people make up roughly 3.2% of the population, like I said before. So from a world-building perspective, this means that for every 100 people in your city, there should be around 3 to 4 people with autism. It doesn't mean they all know each other, but I'm trying to convey a sense of scale here. In a group of 100 people, if we took a sample of the per capita population, 3 of them would be autistic, and only 1 of them would have red hair. You know, now I'm thinking about how many autistic characters we have versus how many redheads, and it's kinda skewed. But I mean, that's not to discount the fact that the area we're talking about largely has a lot more redheaded people than many other places in the world, so understanding that deserves a little slack. But for instance, it's important because autistic characters are varied just as much as redheads are. There is a huge difference between Andrew, Jack, and Cassandra in terms of personality, desires, wants, and needs. And so characters like Daniel and Madeline, and I'm gonna throw in Bree here because at least she's coded that way, are still very different. Do they each have a special interest? Yeah, okay, they do. Daniel likes baking, Bree is into politics, and Madeline really likes archery. I mean, the Fae. Right? Right. Anyway, the points in which they differ offer a broader range of representation instead of just checking in a few tropes. You do that too many times, and you've just established a caricature, not a character, and that comes across as mockery. Autistic people deserve love and support. They're not broken, wrong, or sick. Their brains just work a little bit differently than other people. And now, here's a little something for the "we didn't have autism back when we were kids." I want you to know that unless you are currently over 100 years old, yes, you did. The term was first used in 1911 by Eugene Bleuler to describe withdrawal and self-absorption in adults with schizophrenia. Pause. Quick note. This is a complete misunderstanding of what autism is. That's because Bleuler viewed autism as a form of psychosis instead of what it was, a developmental disorder. This is something we've only recently started moving away from. In the 1930s, autism spectrum disorder was maligned in many places. It's where we got the term Asperger's from. The reason we don't use Asperger's to refer to autism anymore, though, is because of the bloodied history behind it. This comes from Dr. Hans Asperger, an Austrian scientist who worked within the Third Reich almost exclusively with autistic children. Asperger's experiments were cruel, often inhumane, and were designated to separate the useful autistic children from the infirmed autistic children. And the ruling powers in Germany during the 1930s and 1940s did not allow infirmed people to live. Some will argue that Asperger's diagnosis saved many autistic children, but that's a bitter pill, and it does nothing to excuse the loss of life of countless other individuals. In the 1960s, it was more of the same, linked to psychosis and even called schizophrenic reaction childhood type. This persisted all the way up to the 1980s when the DSM-3 shifted into 2 categories of autism, infantile autism and pervasive developmental disorders, making a hard break from the schizophrenic framing. The 1990s saw an expansion of subtypes all the way up to the 2010s until we got to the current spectrum model we use today. Using this spectrum model has greatly enhanced our understanding of autism and how it affects people in many different ways. I want to do some more breakdowns like this and how the media portrays different characters by things like race or gender, but this is the one I felt was most important to do to highlight some of the mistreatment of autistic individuals given the current climate. I hope you like this video. Hype and leave a comment. Recently, YouTube has been throttling my viewer count. Our streams have been getting more than a few people in them lately, and I'm used to doing double digits easily, and viewership has been down otherwise for months. We're trying so hard to get to at least 6,000 by the end of the summer, so get those numbers up, guys. Like, subscribe, share the videos, and comment down below. It'll really help us get into the algorithm a lot more than we already are. If this is your first video, check out the Tales of Atonement Monomyth playlist at the end. I want to thank every one of you once again this week for coming to these ramblings of an anxiety-ridden pyromancer
and her dragon best friend. We're a small team just doing our best to bring our stories we've loved for decades and hope they're the kind you like too.
With a side info dump of psychology, lore, history, and social awareness.
If this is your first video, we hope you'll stay for another one. And maybe you could consider becoming a subscriber. We'd love to see you again.
Our subscribers can move mountains for a channel like this. The engagement we get just keeps growing each week. You guys are getting the word out and people are listening.
And we really can't express how grateful we are to see our passion project take off. 20 years of love and dedication are here laid bare. Help as much as you care to, but at least watch and talk with us.
Of course, we can't close out a video without giving a shout out to our patrons. Emily Masternardi,
Heinrich 28,
Pammy Poo,
JC Moreland,
Shadow Fox,
Charles Tam,
Arya Gamari,
Lundair Lumen. But also don't forget our channel members, Moose Now,
Jack McLeod,
Plebe 64 Potato,
Lundair Lumen,
7 Stars Sanctuary,
and Chained Furry, Many a Mickle Maximuckle.
See you next week.